Call of Juarez: The Cartel is often hailed as being one of the worst first-person shooters ever made. It's the sequel to Bound in Blood, taking place in current-day Los Angeles and Mexico as you play as one of 3 characters in a campaign that covers such themes as drug dealing, human trafficking, and corruption. Now, I think it's unarguably the worst game in the entire series, and yeah, it's a pretty crappy shooting game overall, but is it the worst FPS game ever made? Well, let's just find out, shall we?
LAPD on the ground. Get down!
So the story in this one centers around the 3 main protagonists, Ben McCall, Kim Evans, and Eddie Guerrera. At the start of the campaign, you're given the option to choose to play as one of the characters, with each of them having different advantages with certain weapon types. Ben, for instance, reloads revolvers faster than the others, but also each character has their own separate side plots where you have to accomplish a series of hidden tasks. This is what the game calls secret agendas and secret items. Now for Eddie, he's trying to pay off some bad debt, so he goes around collecting drugs throughout each chapter. This kind of fills in the collectible aspect of the gameplay, but also gives the game a bit more replayability, as you want to replay the single player campaign and see it from the alternate angles of each character. Now I say single player even though the whole game is designed around this co-op model, with the areas in between missions having lobbies, even if you're playing by yourself. Anyway, aside from that, each character plays out mostly the same, aside from those few key differences in how they each use certain weapon types, and they've all got access to concentration mode, which is your standard bullet time feature. What I think is most interesting is that the Cartel is a very story-driven game with frequent and lengthy cinematics. At times it's more like you're watching a movie than playing a video game, because some of these feel like they just go on and on. And in all honesty, it's actually a pretty neat story, inaccuracies aside. Ben, Kim and Eddie aren't really your clear-cut good guys, and they've all got their vices and questionable moral standings. Also, this idea of the DEA, the FBI and the LAPD joining forces to take down a Mexican drug cartel sounds like something from a cheesy 90s movie. There's hookers, there's strip clubs, there's gangbangers, drug dealers, and all the characters use 4-letter words like they're full stops.
Hey, Flaco. Sorry for the cock block.
Date's over, mamacita.
The game starts off in Los Angeles before eventually heading to Mexico for the last few chapters, which is where the Western theme finally rears its head. The only issue is that the whole thing takes itself way too seriously, and the voice acting and animation isn't really of the highest standards, so it does come off as a bit ham-fisted.
How about a little less belly aching and a little more concentrating?
Sound is also liable to glitch out a fair bit as well, and there's cinematics where the game was completely devoid of proper sound effects, which I'm not sure was a bug from the game or just sloppy design. Outside of this though, you'll notice a few other ways that the game drops the ball. For instance, there's a character that shows up in one of the earlier cinematics who's some kind of prostitute that the team questions, but then the character model pops up later in the game as a sort of background NPC. And also in another cinematic entirely, and it's kinda jarring because you would first think it's the same character, but then you just realize they're recycling that character model due to laziness. For a game that's so story intensive, this kind of thing is just confusing. With all the secret agendas each character also has for their backstories, it can be often hard to figure out what the hell is going on at times.
I think you're taking this a little too personally.
I don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Visually, the game isn't amazing, but it does look pretty standard for other games of the same time period. It's really a game that's been made for the consoles first and foremost, with the PC as an afterthought. I've played this on both the PS3 and the PC, and they do look by and large the same, though obviously the PC version has a high resolution, but it's still neck and neck. I'd even go so far as to say that this one looks worse than Bound in Blood at times.
Look, I'm sorry, but no fucking way.
I will say though that the music is still pretty damn good. In fact, the whole Call of Juarez series has always had an awesome soundtrack, so at least if nothing more, they've nailed one aspect of the presentation. Having said that though, the storyline is really probably the strongest element of the game. At least it's the area that feels like it's had the most attention put into it. The gameplay is where the whole thing just falls apart like a dried dog turd. Now this is really just a standard, boring modern shooting game with the tacked on regenerating health and checkpoint system. Regardless of who you play as, you're just going to be shooting the same generic bad guys with guns over and over. And it's just that kind of lazy, boring gameplay where you kind of shoot at things for a bit until the game informs you you're about to die. Then you hide in cover for a few seconds before popping out and doing it all over again. Occasionally you'll breach a room, which is where you and another character kick a door down and it goes all slow motion-y as you kill a group of enemies in quick succession. There's times too when the game kind of defies its own logic and makes little sense. For instance, most cars will explode if you so much as even aim your weapon at them, causing massive damage to nearby enemies. And then other cars you can empty an entire magazine into and they still don't blow up. There's moments where you have to rush from cover to cover to avoid gunfire, and during these moments, for some reason, you take damage like 5 times more quickly and die super easily. The game is heavily designed around co-op play, but it seems they didn't think about how it would affect you if you're playing solo, so during the frequent driving sections where you're like chasing another car, you can't even fire a weapon and just have to sit there getting peppered with gunfire from nearby enemies. Now, there is a shitload of guns you can use in this game, most of which you'll have to unlock by reaching certain chapters of the game, or by leveling up through collecting secret items and completing the secret agendas. There's assault rifles, shotguns, sniper rifles, submachine guns, pistols, and revolvers, and they're all more or less the same. I mean, a couple of shots from a pistol will kill an enemy, and so will a couple of shots from an assault rifle, so there doesn't really seem to be all that much difference between the gun types. One thing that did kind of irk me was how ammunition is the same for submachine guns, assault rifles, and light machine guns, which doesn't make a lick of sense. So equipping both an SMG and an assault rifle, for instance, is kinda pointless if you're hoping to use the submachine gun to fall back onto when you run low on ammo. I also found shotguns and sniper rifles kinda useless. Shotguns are useless because they have a really piss poor range and crappy rate of fire, and with the sniper rifles it's really rare to find ammo for the damn thing, and you're never really taking out enemies at such a great distance that you can take full advantage of the scope. Now, there are some genuinely good moments in this game, though I won't lie. There's a really cool chapter where you get to revisit the fort from the first Call of Juarez game, which is pretty neat, but overall it's got a real been there, done that feel to it, and the generic shooting doesn't really help alleviate the tediousness of the whole thing. As a result, the Cartel is easily the worst game in the series, and I don't think anyone can really deny that. All the TNA and the 4-letter words can't really save what's a run-of-the-mill shooter.
What's the problem here?
Thankfully, it is kind of short, coming in at around 4 or 5 hours for a first playthrough, and there's a bit of replayability with all the secret agendas for each character, and also the multitude of achievements you can earn in this game. But if you do skip this one, you're really not missing out on all that much. Which brings us on to the final game in the series, Call of Juarez Gunslinger, which brings the series back to its western roots. And in the next video, Sonny Jim will take a look at it and see how the whole series comes to an end.
As fast as he was, I was just a bit faster.